This is episode 41 of the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast with artificial intelligence ethics expert, John C. Havens.
We have to start saying to ourselves, and this is very much about fitness and the work that I did with Hackathon, which is when we first met. The primary question of my book, Artificial Intelligence, is how will machines know what we value if we don't know ourselves?
Welcome to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast for club owners, operators, and fitness professionals. I am your host, Josh Trent, and this is your number one trusted resource for the accelerating world of fitness technology. Each week, we bring you an expert interview with a global influencer at the crossroads of fitness and technology. You'll gain the insights, tools, and inspiration you need to stay connected to the pulse of what matters most for your fitness business in the age of exponential technologies. On episode 41, we're taking a deeper dive into the ethical considerations of artificial intelligence inside and outside the fitness industry with John C. Havens and his work at the IEEE, a global technology organization with over 500,000 members in 160 plus countries. I know you're going to enjoy this podcast with our expert guest around artificial intelligence, as one of the most requested topics that arose during our IHRSA FIT-C roundtable discussion earlier this year was the technology considerations and policies for AI and machine learning in outside industries that are affecting our space. So whether you're a brand new listener to the show who's an owner, operator, or fitness pro, interested in how AI will empower you to serve your clients with more context, or you've been listening to the show for a while and will use the information you receive in this show to help drive the change we need in our industry, this podcast is delivering much more than just industry trends. It's giving us that deeper look towards how AI is changing the industry today and in the future. Be sure to check your show notes by clicking on the artwork right from your phone, or head on over to fittechcouncil.org/podcast for a deeper look into the resources mentioned that are impacting your career. With the exponential growth of technology that is driving our space, what are the ethical considerations, governmental policies, and regulations surrounding the use of AI that are impacting the industry across the world? The answer to that very big question, and so many more takeaways for club owners, operators, and fitness pros in this episode with artificial intelligence ethics expert, John C. Havens. John C. Havens is the executive director for the IEEE Global AI Ethics Initiative, a global initiative for ethical considerations in artificial intelligence and autonomous systems. He's a writer, speaker, activist, and consultant focusing on the intersection of technology and culture. John aims to help people increase their well-being by taking a measure of their lives. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much, Josh. Pleasure to be on the show, and thank you for having me.
You know, this is excellent because 2 years ago, we'll link this in the show notes, I got the pleasure of interviewing you for Wellness Force Radio, really in the beginning of my technology journey. And John, I'm so excited to share your expertise and wisdom with the Fitness Plus Technology audience, because we've been exploring AI and machine learning on the show for quite some time. But with someone like you, this is a cool moment, man. So thanks again for coming on.
Well, thanks again for having me. Real pleasure to be back with you and to talk to this audience. Thanks for having me.
So 15 plus years, John, as an influencer in media and technology. Tell us now what you do and why you do it.
Sure. So I'm executive director of this program at IEEE. IEEE is the world's largest technology association. More specifically, it's really focused on engineers and academics, but it is the world's largest in the sense of it's got about 500,000 members in 160 countries. So it's deeply influential in the technology community, especially for where a lot of technology starts, which is where academics, researchers, et cetera. So what I'm doing now is I'm executive director of this program that's focused on two things. One is creating essentially a code of ethics for AI or artificial intelligence, and then making recommendations for standards around how to actually employ AI ethics in regards to how technology would be released.
And I think many of the club operators, fitness pros, just technology enthusiasts in our space probably have heard of IEEE, but if they haven't, I mean, a milestone for this organization was in 1984, the first direct broadcast satellite service. So this is not something that's new. This has been around for multiple decades. Can you share with us the role of IEEE, the organization, why you believe it's so pivotal to the current digital focus in our world?
Sure. Actually, I forget the exact year. It was actually formed by Thomas Edison. So like the guy in the late 1800s, it's been around for that long. It's to your point, multiple decades, more than 100 years. In terms of why it's so important to the digital world it's really when you think about the heart of any technology that's built in that value chain of creation, there's always engineers, right? And programmers and academics, sort of coming up with revolutionary ideas and papers that go from concept to actual design and production. So in that sense, it's pivotal in terms of having an association, especially with the global side of it. That's why I got involved. Is I love, especially with ethics, you have to be conscious. You're releasing, and a health app is a great example. What health means to even a certain portion of the U.S., right? The Eastern Seaboard versus the West, right? In general, there may be more. I'm making a generalization, but I think it's true. California, for instance, a lot more. Like I love going to San Francisco because I know they'll have soy, tofu, et cetera, on the menu versus other places in suburbs on the Eastern Seaboard. If I say soy, they think I'm saying the words I am in Spanish, right? They don't know what I'm saying. So in that sense, context from a global standpoint for technology is pivotal as well.
What do you think when we look at artificial intelligence companies in that health and fitness space? Is there a common thread of why they might be successful and how they can be successful in the future?
Simplicity of design. In the sense of, when I use a Fitbit or something, when you run, at the end of the day, the device is really a device in the sense of the pun of the device to get you to do something, right? Meaning we are methods of our own devices or whatever the phrase is. And anyway, the point being that it should be something that enables versus sort of distracts. So at least for me, I really prefer something that has to be visible enough to be encouraging, to nudge, as it were. So, but not something that's so complex. It's one thing to set it up, but then if you have to spend like half an hour every day, like rejiggering your inputs or something, that's frustrating. So I think simplicity of design in terms of privacy and personal data, that's pivotal. Companies that recognize that your data is not just about privacy in terms of security, like encryption and all that, but it also reflects very intimate aspects of who you are, your culture, your subjective truth. And so it should not just be sort of like, hey, let's do these things we have to do from a compliance standpoint for data, especially with health-oriented data. I mean, not just like personal medical intimate stuff, but, your steps, how far you run, diet, that's stuff that can be used in purposes if a person isn't fully aware of who's using it for things that you probably wouldn't want it to be used for. So a company has to distinguish themselves.
I think when we look at the user experience, what a lot of club owners and especially trainers are trying to make sense of right now, John, is we have these data sets, we have these wearables, we have all this technology that can serve us, but how do we actually create that bridge of meaning and actionable coaching with these devices? Have you seen across the board any UI or UX, any experiences or flows that you personally have enjoyed and that you see artificial intelligence tying into to create that extra value in the chain?
I think it's how things can be aggregated. Obviously, especially with health, yes, how much you weigh is an important piece of information. But then obviously how much sleep you get is important. And, this is, I think, a common practice, which is great that when apps do this, is how to aggregate those different things so you can kind of create a dashboard. So I think by the way, that's one thing with AI and machine learning in particular, aggregating a lot of disparate data as long as there's a good mindset of how you're correlating it. So you're not necessarily saying this sleep data means this about that running data. You have to make sure that the sets of data make sense with each other. But anyway, in general, writ large, machine learning is great. That's what it's perfect for doing, is crunching that type of that amount of data.
And we're going to talk about your book, which I super enjoyed, Artificial Intelligence. And the subtitle is Embracing Our Humanity to Maximize Machines, which I believe that's what we're trying to do in the fitness space. But when we look at misconceptions, John, I mean, there's so much information out there about AI. I even read this past week that Facebook had to shut down an AI program because the machines had created their own language. What is your definition, just to paint the picture here, of artificial intelligence? How would you define AI?
Oh, that's a good question. It's a tough one. In the AI industry, a lot of people don't use that term as much anymore because it's very broad. It's kind of like saying the internet, right? It's so vast. It's a start, the internet, but it's not like what aspect of the internet. But I think, there's machine learning, there's cognitive computing, there's deep learning. So there's the kind of different fields within AI. For my book, and I think a very simplistic definition is when a device or a system in some way replicates or assists in human intelligence or choice. That may not be the best definition, but I'll stick with it at least for right now.
And misconceptions around this, people have so many ideas of what AI is. Do you come across in your work with IEEE and your initiatives there any common misconceptions that and your organization knows are simply not true?
Sure. I think, among AI practitioners in the community, there are some pretty commonly accepted terms. So, for instance, you often will hear the term AGI and ASI, which stands for Artificial General Intelligence versus artificial superintelligence. There's also what's called weak and strong AI. And now, again, this is where, based on who you're talking to and what the context is, those definitions can get, hotly debated, as they should. But in general, like what we're used to today with algorithms and sort of basic, sometimes it's not even machine learning, but it could be, algorithms that most people would call that, weak AI or whatever they would call it. It's not, has no form of, it's not necessarily fully replicating a human task. Obviously, most people can't write an algorithm unless they are a programmer. But my point being there is like it may be replicating a task, but it's a task of like, on Amazon, you would never choose this book. So it's not like a human couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Very, very simplistic definition. And it varies. But artificial general intelligence is often like a lot of people will talk about Google DeepMind and Go. When I forget the name of the guy in South Korea who played Go, this game, and lost to a machine designed to, or a program designed to play Go. Now, that in that sense, artificial general intelligence, the reason that can be a big deal is when there is a task created by a system, in this case DeepMind was the organization, Google DeepMind, that in one sense can seem to be better than, air quotes, better than a human. That in that sense it could replace a particular aspect of human skill. Now, that doesn't mean that everything was replaced. In that case, it was the machine was built, or the system rather, to play Go. Then this is the biggest misconception and confusion. When people talk about AI and they have a picture of the Terminator on something, which really bugs the AI community, because like any subject about AI for about a year, every picture was, the Terminator.
Yeah.
And it's like, can we move beyond that? And artificial superintelligence is what most people would call like when the singularity happens and there would be actually a form of living, an entity that would have a form of sentience. So anyway, that's the big thing is most people, a lot of media always think that AI means artificial superintelligence, where today there's no practitioner or academic that I know of who would say that ASI or superintelligence will be here. The earliest of anyone that I think is credible in one sense is 15, 20 years. Most people would say 30, 50 to 100 years.
Ray Kurzweil has talked about this in print and all across the media. We know that Moore's law is pretty much on point. I mean, the trajectory line might go up and down on the sine wave curve, but what do you feel now about Moore's law? Do you see that in all industries? Is that trend line still exactly what they said in the beginning?
I mean, the short answer is, yeah, of course. And this is the heart of Moore's law, which I think is brilliant, obviously, which is when you build a tool, like a hammer to build a house, it's not a great analogy, but then you build a second tool that's better, an automatic, nail gun, right? Now you're not just building the house, twice as fast, you're building it 10 times as fast. But then when you build not just a better version of that one tool, but you bring in a second tool and then a third and fifth and seventh tool, and all of those tools can also work together, right? This is where, this is a different topic, but when people talk about like jobs and automation and they compare AI to the Industrial Revolution, like with Luddites, it's a very different time period because, the Luddites, for instance, didn't have stuff that went to the cloud, right?
Yeah.
When you think about that analogy I just gave for the hammer and stuff, it's not a good one, but in terms of the digital. But when you have any system and then it improves and learns, as it were, air quotes, learns, and then it can chuck data up to the cloud, which is pretty universal for all of them, then that means fairly instantly, again, based on the system and how they're built, one machine can talk to another machine around the world almost instantly, and that data of how the system is improving can be shared. And then, so that's the thing that a lot of people don't think about, and it relates back to the Moore's law is it's like take Moore's law, but then take 10 other Moore's laws and shove them together. And that's kind of where we have to think.
Let's shift to your book too, as well, Artificial Intelligence, where you explore this humanity's connection with AI today, and then also some considerations for the future. There's a lot of club operators and owners, people that might run a facility that has 1,000 or even up to 10,000 plus members. Do you think this book applies to them? Why did you write this book, and who is this book for?
I hope the book applies to them. I mean, from a strictly business standpoint, the short answer is I think it'd be useful for them to read through to get the sense of, best in class thinking, at least, not for me, I mean, for the people I referenced when I wrote the book a couple of years ago. In terms of actual, like the technology of what's the best, like machine learning-ish or AI-oriented program to put in there, I didn't necessarily have the fitness industry in mind per se. But the reason I hope it's useful to any human who reads it is I think right now today what's pivotal is not that we focus so much as a society about like, oh, I hope robots don't kill us, because I think that's really dangerous thinking in terms of it's just why bother, like you're probably going to die from depression-related illness first anyway, but I think the thing is what I really did is I said right now today algorithms that people are, your listeners are dealing with, hundreds of algorithms are accessing their data, et cetera. And they're all making little changes and influence to who we are and our identity.
Yeah.
That's the side of AI, which is not evil, but it's something where we have to start saying to ourselves, and this is very much about fitness and the work that I did with Hackathon, which is when we first met. The primary question of my book, Artificial Intelligence, is how will machines know what we value if we don't know ourselves?
And I believe that's a big point that applies to everyone, because right now the core tenets of the fitness industry are being very shooken up, John. We have people in our space like Peloton that are bringing this virtual fitness. We have devices that have just launched. We'll link this in our show notes that are using AI right now. I mean, it's not something that's going to happen in the next 2 years. It's been happening for years. What are a few areas when you look at the health club space for owners to create some new revenue streams with artificial intelligence? How do you believe artificial intelligence will help grow the fitness industry?
I think in conjunction with virtual reality and augmented reality, there's a lot of really cool stuff where AI under the hood is going to improve tons of technology. I think this is where I'm going to be excited to see the innovation from the health space in terms of, I know, for instance, podcasts, which we're doing right now, even like 5 years ago, I'm not exactly sure how they did it, but some of the leading health podcasts that I loved would give you stories that you could download on a podcast, and when you ran, somehow it would adjust to the accelerometer, and it would know the rhythm of how you ran, and as you went faster or slower, the pace of the story would pick up, or the narrative would be a mystery, and so it would be like you're going around the corner, and it would give you kind of a general jog in a park. Anyway, the whole point there being it was very immersive. And where it's not about trying to distract yourself per se from the fitness, but for those of, I'll put myself in this camp, at least when you're kind of getting back into a regular fitness regime, augmented reality and Pokemon, most people think of augmented reality in games. But what if you could run in the park and it transformed it to look like you were running on a beach or in Prague because you love Prague, right? That's where I think AR and VR in conjunction with AI will be a huge benefit for fitness folks.
And I think about this platform, Rock My Run, which is this running app that adjusts music to pacing. And there's many of them out there in our space. Looking at wearables, John, the current HIPAA policy and security standards for keeping our steps and sleep data safe. Be real with us here. Is keeping step numbers private really that important when we look at the more personal data sets found in electronic medical records like medicines or biometrics? Do we really need to keep step numbers safe?
Well, it's a great question. It's a deep question. I think the thing is HIPAA, I have no expertise to talk in any real depth about HIPAA, except that I know I went to a conference recently where there was an expert in HIPAA, and she held her hand up about 4.5 feet from the floor. And she said, HIPAA, if you stacked it, the paper, it would stack up to my hand on paper. So I think the big thing there is that I don't know, because it depends on the context, right? Step data out of context, meaning per your question, in isolation, I would agree in the sense of I don't know that anyone would care, right? Meaning, except that, hey, I hope it's reflecting a regime that works for you. The thing that is always the case is that no data lives in isolation. And HIPAA and any other regulation, especially in the States, the short answer is we have no access to our data. And this is not to put down any app creator or any organization. And certainly, obviously, I'm a huge proponent for AI. That's why I'm doing the work I'm doing. But it should be up to the individual. Right now, any app or any privacy or terms and conditions that a person accepts, there's a phrase called term of adhesion in law, which means understandably in one sense, it makes sense. Do you want to use my app or my social network or whatever? Yes or no, right? That's the only real answer they have. And so then the person is supposed to go, well, I'll read the privacy conditions.
Yeah.
But in general, by the time you get to anything that's more than 2 pages of a privacy thing, most people just won't read it. And secondly, usually almost de rigueur or de facto, what those things will say is, even if it says things like, we may use your data to sell to third parties, then it means you can't use the app, period. Or you can't then say, well, I guess my data is going to be sold. So then the thing is, you might think correctly, as I do, like we said here, my step data, kind of who cares? But your step data is sold by that one, whoever, the one app. But then the person buying it also knows to get your GPS data.
Yeah.
And then your step data and GPS, and then one other. And by the time you have even 3 points of data, let alone 2, that is then where there's an issue. And so this is a much bigger conversation. But in general, yes, I agree with you. Data in isolation, but it's never in isolation, so it's a bit moot.
Interesting. I'm looking at a webinar you did, Ethically Aligned Design, Prioritizing Wellbeing for Artificial Intelligence and Autonomous Systems. Can you tell us a little bit about what you did there? This was back in January. Some of the work you do around artificial intelligence does relate to well-being. What does that look like from IEEE and yourself?
So well-being, as you would know, and probably your listeners would know, it can be a confusing term because a lot of people associate well-being with mood, meaning, hey, how are you feeling? And they'll say that's well-being. Other people will know that there is more of a fitness-oriented aspect to the well-being industry. Like when you say the well-being industry, at least me, I think of like your listeners, like people who are in, the fitness space, or there might be a lot of food products, granola, whatever. In the economics arena, the well-being indicators are things like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals or the OECD Better Life Index, or for environmental aspects, the Happy Planet Index. And the reason these are so critical and important is most of the world, the main value that people look to in terms of what the technology you're building, is it, quote, successful? Yes, you want to help people and you're designing, in this case, health apps, right, to help people. So the success is, are people buying it and using it and improving their lives, which of course is huge.
Yeah.
But the real metric that's universal is actually always, de facto, goes back to GDP. And GDP is a measure of exponential growth in productivity and finances. That's it. That's all it was designed to do. It's not demeaning it. But if you don't have societal and also environmental factors, sort of a triple bottom line aspect of when you build something, are you defining success in, yes, we have to make profit. But if you say exponential profit or, increased only shareholder profit, then that changes the dynamic of the choices you make for the technology you create.
On a recent episode with Craig Bradley, we talked about biohacking. And John, this is how it's going to apply in the fitness industry, where we look at these segments of well-being, fitness, wellness, longevity. Can you share with us what you believe about the future of biohacking? What do you feel this will bring to health, fitness, and wellness?
Oh, man, that's a tough call. I mean, biohacking, obviously, anytime the word hack is used in the sense of a negative sense, meaning something happens to someone without choice or consent, I just want to say that, I wrote a book, as you know, called Hacking Happiness. So for the listeners who think hacking is negative, let's just say we all agree in unison, not a great thing, right?
Yeah.
Secondly, if someone decides, in the AI world, a lot of times the phrase used is augmentation. And the augmentation is both mental and physical, like things like, can I implant a chip in my brain if I'm suffering from Parkinson's to try to avoid that? Can I replace, this is where it starts getting more complex from an ethical standpoint. Can I replace a working eye because I want to replace it with, something that would give me whatever, infrared vision? I think, for me, a lot of the reason I wrote my book and the work I'm doing now with IEEE is it's not my place to judge someone's values in terms of when they would want to hack, in a positive sense, meaning transform part of their physical regime or their mental or physiological makeup. That's up to them and their family.
Yeah.
But I think what is critical to do is to say right now, today, before, writ large, those changes might happen, what is true about human health and well-being today? And there are things like, right now, today, inherently, humans have emotions. Machines don't. That does not mean that there aren't machines being built to measure emotions, and that field is called affective or affect, AFFECT, affective computing. I'm just saying that while we're asking these critical questions about what makes us different from computers, or from systems rather, or AI, we have about 5 or 10 years to really say, well, before that change happens, today, this is true about health. And then that means we kind of have a level set to say, A is our starting point. B is like the next 10 or 20 years where there's a lot of stuff happening we don't know.
Yeah.
And C, in the midst of B, is what are the metrics of success that we want to hit?
This is why I was so excited to bring you on the show. At our roundtable meeting at IHRSA, the FIT-C roundtable, many things came up in regards to requesting information about what's happening around the fitness space, artificial intelligence, machine learning. We've definitely gone there with some gems on the show today, John. This is our last round. It's 6 fast questions. First up is, as a busy pro that you are and a father immersed in tech, how do you create healthy habits around digital media and social media consumption for yourself?
Short answer, prayer. Faith is kind of the fundamental basis for how I've lived my life since I was a kid. And it's a real challenge. I have to be not just on the screen a lot, but, AI is advancing a lot of screen-oriented stuff. So I find that prayer, meditation is a must to kind of get away from screens, just not because screens are bad, but that helps me kind of reset.
For club operators and fitness professionals listening, are there any upcoming policies around artificial intelligence, technology, or big data that will impact our space?
Yeah, definitively get to know what's called the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation coming out of the EU. By May 2018, any organization handling European citizens' data that is not handling it according to that legislation can get fined. I think it's like up to 4% of their gross annual revenue. It's a big deal. So especially for larger companies, but for any company, European citizen data is cross digital borders. It's not geographical. If you are not dealing with that now, you have to start thinking about compliance.
And for this policy, can you go just a little bit deeper? Because the first time I think we've heard of this on the show, for operators that have facilities across the seas, what might that mean to them if they were to break that policy law?
Sure, and a good question. But again, it's everybody, meaning European citizens' data. Obviously, the law is about European citizens. Their data travels across the web. So that's why everyone on the planet needs to think about it. In terms of why it's so important, it's a cultural aspect of the EU or the European, at least the people that made the law, the legislation, that data is an asset that relates to a fundamental right of privacy, et cetera. And that's just them. That's the EU, right? That's their cultural whatever that made the law. But why it's so critical to be compliant to is, again, it's not like a small fine, right? You could be, it's 2 million pounds or whatever, or euros fine for every instance that a company may, utilize European data in a way that breaks the law. So it's a huge deal.
We'll definitely link GDPR portal in our show notes today. How will emerging tech help us reclaim this valuable data for ourselves? In other words, we'll be able to directly profit from the insights linked to our quantified selves. How does that happen?
IEEE P as in Peter 7006. It's about creating what we call a personal data AI agent. Right now, today, there's a lack of symmetry, and I'll try to make this fast. I know these are the quick questions, but we're tracked, hundreds of times a day, but we don't necessarily know who's tracking us. This is not about anti-business or whatever, but we need a tool, and in this case, it's a cloud-based sort of oriented tool where you can have a copy of your own data so that you can basically apply your terms and conditions and broadcast them back to the digital world. That means then, especially with fitness data, et cetera, you get to say, hey, someone who's trying to access my fitness data, even though I signed whatever terms and conditions, these are my terms and conditions. And digitally, will have a timestamp, GPS located, algorithmic level, always on sort of both protector, but also a clarifier of, hey, if you want a relationship with me, this is who I am. I get to say who I am. And if you want to interact with my data, you got to go through this personal data AI agent.
What do you see now as a potential success for a model using wearables combined with virtual coaching or even artificial intelligence that, when you believe you look at the landscape, will elicit sustainable behavior change in groups?
There's a big trend called, I mentioned it earlier, called nudging. Nudging, like anything in tech, can be applied in positive or negative ways. We have another standards working group focused on nudging. I think it's P7008. And the reason to bring that up is, both for an individual and for groups, what is a big challenge, and that's kind of why I wrote my book, is moving forward how a person wants to be encouraged or nudged, quantified self, or, if you said, hey, John, can you text me? I want you to text me 3 times a week to make sure I went to the gym, right? That's positive nudging because it implies or overtly that there's context and you want me to nudge you, even though you might be irritated when I text you.
Right.
The nudging, I think the critical thing is, however we move forward, consent has to be consent right now is broken. It kind of means nothing. It means basically nothing in the digital world. So all of the great benefits of working out and the stuff that can be automated has to start from there first. So I think it's really about communicating to people, hey, this is a regimen that you want to participate in. Here's how we're going to do this process. You may not know all the times the way that we're nudging you down the road, but do you get the basic idea of how we're doing it? Because then when these things happen, you are understanding in general how it will work.
And I love that you mentioned this policy, the P7008 nudging. We've actually had on the show the CEO of Nudge Coach, and I believe that is definitely in our fitness space and growing. John, for the next question, we look at 2 years that's passed since our first interview together on Wellness Force Radio. In the past couple of years, has there been anything that surprised you about developments in artificial intelligence?
Yes, sure. I mean, that's a tough question too, because so much has happened. I think, the thing you mentioned, I think we were chatting before the show started about Facebook shutting down a algorithm that sort of quote spoke a language that it didn't understand, right? Yeah. I think what's a trend that we're seeing, which is really important, and this is why we think ethics is so important. By the way, ethics for us is not about making moral decisions like saying, hey, you're wrong or whatever. It's about saying this technology is so awesome, but yet also powerful. Aligning how we want our human values to be imbued, as it were, in the technology is critical, A. And then B, safety is like, you can say, oh, you're hindering innovation. But in that example, what happened? Like, great, you shut it down. But did something negative happen that we don't know about? Like where someone was confused because of the language. And also it's just one of those things where it's like, why did you launch it if you didn't fully understand what it was going to do? Like, these are things where probably the answer is, they were well-intentioned. They, you don't know what you don't know, right? So sometimes in that case, they launched it not necessarily like, tenting their fingers and saying, we can't wait till the language confuses people.
Right.
But nonetheless, that's also why people are confused, and that's why taking more time is critical. Or what could have happened is something really negative could have happened. Someone commits suicide because of something they read. So that's why it's so critical to take more time now before we don't have it.
For our last question here, we look at a focus for what the IEEE stands for, your work also with them and in your own right, for ethics, monetization, and customer service. We stand right now, John, at this crossroads of fitness and tech. How do you believe we can use technology to evolve both humanity and the bottom line for business?
Well, the subtitle of our paper, Ethically Aligned Design, is A Vision for Prioritizing Human Well-Being with AI and AS. That's my short answer.
And for the IEEE, this Global AI Ethics Initiative, where's the best resource for club owners and operators, people with a health and fitness mindset, to go to learn more about IEEE and how their work might rub into the fitness industry?
I'd say just Google IEEE and the word fitness, and then do some other searches, because there's hundreds and hundreds of papers about fitness tech on the IEEE. They have a massive library. So I would just say have some fun and do some exploring.
Well, John, it's been such a pleasure to have you back in my consciousness and sharing your work with the Fitness Tech Show. There's been so many positive changes, and I look forward to a bright future seeing your work personally and also with IEEE. So thanks for coming on the show.
Well, Josh, thanks again. Great to reconnect with you, and best regards to all your listeners.
For our club owners that serve members outside of the United States, in 2018, the European Union General Data Protection Regulation Act is the most important change we've seen in 20 years. Be sure to click on your show notes right from your phone or head to fittechcouncil.org/podcast to learn more about how this will affect your fitness business. John reminds us that as we look at AI, one of the key factors to consider and how our industry will benefit is by allowing the user experience to be as simple as possible. In a world of multiple data sets and limitless wearable devices, John believes that what will separate the great fitness companies from the good is how they will use AI to achieve the most intuitive and simplistic user experience for their customers. Regardless of how much you already know at the intersection of machine learning and artificial intelligence, the time to take a serious look at this technology was yesterday. Be sure to contact the Fitness Industry Technology Council by heading over to the website or sending us a message on Facebook if you have questions about how this tech integrates into your business so you can serve your customers in the age of exponential technology. Thank you for listening to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast. Here's a quick message from Brian O'Rourke.
Hello, everyone. This is Brian O'Rourke. Thanks for listening to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast. I also want to extend our thanks to Josh and the many, many wonderful professionals who've contributed their time and expertise for free for the health club and fitness industry at large. Wouldn't you like your fitness brand, product, or service to be featured on a podcast like this? I know I would. And that's why the Fitness Industry Technology Council, myself, and our companies like Moon Mission Media, Videri Ventures, and Vertimax, among others, have been underwriting the podcast for the last 9 months. Check the show notes for details and consider becoming a sponsor. It's a great way to reach thousands of industry professionals in the fitness and health club space and be a part of educating people on technology adoption and all the opportunities it's going to provide. So please consider joining us here at the podcast, and we look forward to the many series of podcasts ahead. Thanks so much.